Videogames.
What do you dream about? Personally, my dreams get pretty crazy. I actually appreciate how bizarre they can get, though. I legitimately try to trigger these crazy dreams by eating something sweet before I sleep. A piece of chocolate, for instance. I'm sure there's others out there that dream about young girls with red worm-like faces, or SCP when daybreak scenarios with Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory, and this man.
I miss you.
But I'm pretty sure a lot of people dream about slightly more normal things, and I have no doubt that many of us have dreamt about suddenly being able to take flight at a moment's notice. Of course, our dreams are often influenced by our own emotions and mental state, our full unconscious mind unwrapped and laid out before us, our way for our minds to attempt to process the anxiety we face throughout the day. And wouldn't you know it, a little game by Sonic Team released in 1996 would somewhat explore the scenario I just laid out. That game is Nights into Dreams. Now, personally, Nights was a franchise that was always just sort of there for me. Just in the background of my life, but never quite making enough noise to catch my attention until I stumbled upon a channel by the name of Diggy Valentine. Or Digi Valentine? However the hell you pronounce it. Specifically, I watched Diggy's Who Dat video on Rystar, and in that video they said stuff about this game called Nights into Dreams, how they were a fan of it and how Rystar was a sort of transitional period for Sega between the Sonic series and the Nights series. I'd seen the video dozens of times, but for some reason this particular rewatch had gotten the gears in my head to turn. Before I knew it, I was on the Steam page at the right place at the right time, getting a bargain. A cult classic that would have normally been $10 was now completely free. The deal's long over, and thanks to Sega's corporate meddling, the game's taken off of Steam now, but needless to say, I managed to get my hands on an absolute gem. To make it clear, the version I'm looking at is the Steam port, since it was the most accessible way to play the game when I had the idea for this video. Sega Saturn copies are a little outside of my budget of dust-based rabbits. Either or, development of this game began sometime after Sonic Team finished up development on Sonic & Knuckles. Look, Sonic's gotta be mentioned at least once, not only since this is literally a Sonic Team project, but because I'm pretty sure I accidentally made my channel fall into the Sonic Tuber category by wanting to look at the classic Sonic games before I took a look at the Spark the Electric Jester games. After development on Sonic & Knuckles had wrapped up, Yuji Naka and Takashi Iizuka would go back to Sega of Japan to work on a new game for the Sega Saturn with Naoto Oshima, one of the original founding members of Sonic Team. The team had agreed that they shouldn't make another Sonic game, and so went to the drawing board for other ideas. Yuji Naka had proposed an idea he had while waiting for the flight back to Japan, a slow-paced platformer that centered around flight. Being as good a start as any, the team would slowly come up with themes and character concepts for this flight-centric game, going from a small flightless bird that would grow and gain the ability to fly to an Indiana Jones-esque character and even a military theme. Wanting the player to feel as if the protagonist of the game was real, the team had almost come with the idea of the game taking place in a rainbow. However, they quickly pivoted to a more universal experience, and made the game take place in a dream. Their love for the idea went so far as to research the works of Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud, as to create as close to a realistic dream world as possible. Takashi Iizuka in particular becoming so invested that team members allegedly would ask him the meanings of their dreams. As for the main character, the team had decided to scrap the concept of them being an animal very early on, as to further distance themselves from Sonic. Instead, the character designer, Naoto Oshima, would look into North American and European cultures, eventually coming up with a jester-like character with no gender. That last part was decided as an artistic choice, allowing the player to project whatever gender they saw the character as. All of the research the team had done would culminate into what would be called Nights into Dreams, releasing for the Sega Saturn on July 5th, 1996. Nights into Dreams would become the best-selling Sega Saturn game of that year, selling just under 400,000 copies. Unfortunately, while the game would do fairly well for the Sega Saturn, the same could not be said for the Saturn itself, being massively upstaged by Sony's PlayStation and Nintendo's Nintendo 64. This means that, just like Rystar, Nights would fade into obscurity, only getting the occasional cameo and gambling machine every now and again. Honestly, it's a real shame that Nights fell into obscurity like this. When I first played the game for myself, I almost immediately understood why so many people loved the world of Nights into Dreams. Now that I've actually done research thanks to the help of a user who goes by realareturns, I can't help but feel even more upset. This was pretty clearly a major passion project for all of the members of Sonic Team, and it's such a shame that it met the same fate as practically every other Sega character. So what about it? What about the game itself? Why is this game so special to so many? To start, let's get into the plot. In Nights into Dreams, you take control of either Claris or Elliot, both of which being young teenagers that had a particularly rough day. For Claris, she's a young singer in the city of Twin Seeds. One day she finds out about a role in the Twin Seeds 100th anniversary musical. She spends time practicing for the audition, only to completely freeze up when she's up to bat. She's the center of attention. The lights are too bright, the judges are impatient and dismissive, and no matter what she does to try to calm herself down, she can't shake the feeling that one of the judges are going to burst out in laughter at the sight of her. It was all too much for her. So she ran home, the audition still in the back of her mind. That night, when she falls asleep, it happens. The judges laugh at her. Their cackling echoes down the halls as she runs away before a bright light appears. As she cautiously approaches, Claris calms down, her journey in the dream world beginning. That same day, a boy by the name of Elliot was spending time with some other kids, playing basketball. All was going well until an older kid and his gang showed up. The older kid towers over Elliot, hitting the ball out of his hands, running all the way over to the other side of the blacktop, and slam dunking it straight into the basketball hoop, totally upstaging Elliot in the process. He can't do anything but stare back in shock. The older kids laugh at him, taunting Elliot further by throwing his basketball right back at him. He doesn't know what to do or how to feel, so he just lets the basketball hit him in the chest and fall back to the ground. He returns home and, in a fit of rage, he tears up his favorite team's poster and throws out his prized basketball. As he sleeps that night, the emotions stir, dreaming about the awful day he had. The basketball hits his chest again, and as it falls, it sinks through solid concrete. The world goes dark as the boys morph into monstrous creatures, putting Elliot in the spotlight as they chase him down. As he runs away, a bright light appears before him, and with open arms, Elliot embraces whatever comes next as his story begins. Meanwhile, trouble is brewing in the land of dreams known as NiGHTopia. A being known as Wiseman the Wicked is gaining tremendous power, creating creatures called Nightmaren and stealing people's dream energy, which takes the form of colored orbs known as Idia. This is in Wiseman's efforts to take over the dream world and make its way to the waking world. It was around this time that Claris and Elliot arrived in NiGHTopia. A denizen known as a NiGHTopian senses that Claris and Elliot possess the red Idia of courage and warns them of Wiseman's dastardly plans. Claris and Elliot offer their help and are appointed to a Nightmaren known as NiGHTS, a creation of Wiseman who has been trapped in a prison that can only be breached by the red Idia for attempting to rebel against Wiseman. With the aid of NiGHTS, Claris and Elliot must now set out to put an end to Wiseman's plans and save NiGHTopia. Not a bad plot at all. Now, while the latter third was information I got from a site archiving the game's manual, the rest of that was all actually from 2 pre-rendered cutscenes. The best part about them? Almost all of that information was conveyed without a single word. However dated it may look, I gotta give them credit. That isn't an easy thing to do. And while it's aged, I still think these cutscenes look pretty solid. I especially appreciate how Claris's opening cutscene plays out. Starting outside with all of these softer colors and then suddenly cutting to a darker environment with that eerie whistle, followed up by the loud thud of stage lights switching on. The camera pans to the judges, all unwelcoming or disinterested, followed up by the look on Claris's face, knowing that she needs to calm down and failing to do so before the nightmare takes over. It's genuinely phenomenal. It could also just be me being a little biased since I can relate to Claris's situation a lot more than Elliot's. Not getting into too much detail, but I'm something of a hermit. I struggle with communicating with others, and I especially have trouble with being put in the spotlight. It's to the point where it affects my life drastically, and to have Claris's story be almost one for one with my experiences is a bit cathartic for me. What's on display here are both really good examples of anxiety and how it manifests differently in people. I find it really impressive how Nights into Dreams manages to portray it. The game is from 1996, back when social and mental health issues weren't nearly as accepted as they are today. So for a game to be released this far back and nail its portrayal of these kinds of feelings is genuinely amazing. All that said, Nights into Dreams isn't really a story-heavy game. Here, gameplay takes priority, so let's get into that. As mentioned earlier, you have a choice between playing as Claris or Elliot. Both have their own stages, with Claris's being a little easier and Elliot's a little harder. Upon loading in, Claris or Elliot drop down and get mugged like someone who's made a terrible allegory for getting mugged. In the process, the muggers pluck off and store your balls in these capsules as punishment for your terrible allegories and jokes, forcing you to get them back. You're not gonna get very far as the children, so go up to your local twink, dap them up, and become one with the twink. And this is how the majority of the game is going to play. As Nights, you fly along a set track collecting these blue things called chips. Once you have 20, you get over to the Idia capture and fly back to the Idia Palace, where you'll be set on a new track. Rinse and repeat 3 more times, you'll be teleported to a boss stage, where, once you beat said boss, you'll be scored for your overall performance. Now, here's where the real fun begins. You only have about 120 seconds as Nights before the children get separated from them, losing all of their chips and reducing your score to 0 in the process. Now, I'd imagine your first instinct is to blaze on through the stages by constantly drill dashing, refilling your drill gauge by flying through as many rings as possible, and speeding on through the stage to the Idia Palace. Now, you could do that. Or you could fly over the palace, blazing on through the stage over and over again, taking the fastest possible route while getting the highest possible score, getting a high link, and right at the last second, hit the Idia Palace. And this, my friend, this is where the real fun of Nights into Dreams happens. Managing your time, counting how long it takes for you to complete the track, mapping out your route, maximizing your score by performing tricks, you have everything down to a T, and then, oh fuck, I miscounted, I'm not gonna make it, I'm not gonna make it, I'm not gonna make it! And then just by a hair, you make it. That feeling is absolutely unparalleled. It's like cheating death itself, getting into the palace right as the clock hits 0. As for the stages themselves, each one has its own gimmick and enemies. There's a little bit of wiggle room for exploration, although I'd imagine you'll want to do that as Claris or Elliot since they have full 3D movement. But being in the dream world as the children for too long will result in this egg clock spawning in and chasing you down. Touch it and Claris or Elliot will wake up, resulting in a night over. While you can outrun it pretty easily, I can't help but feel like this is just discouraging the player from exploring a little. I suppose I can see the fun in dodging it, but I don't really like the fact that it's actively discouraging me from looking around. Though maybe there's a reason for that. Gameplay perspective aside, there isn't really much out here from what I can tell. I mean, you can collect a few chips here and there, but most generally you're going to be headed straight to NiGHTS as soon as you load in. Meanwhile, as NiGHTS, it's a little difficult to explore. I feel like the camera's too close for comfort, and I can't imagine how hard it was to see in the original Saturn release given the smaller aspect ratio. Though I will say, when it comes to the stages, the game tends to do a pretty solid job at guiding the player where they're supposed to go using the stage's terrain. There's even some secrets here and there, however few and far between. As a matter of fact, if you parallel loop the right spots, you'll be able to find hidden power-ups, more time, or a drill dash gauge refill for instance. That aside though, exploration tends to be relatively limited, but limited exploration is to be expected given the game's genre. At its core, NiGHTS is a linear, speed-based score attack game, so there being little room for exploration is right on the money. As for the enemies themselves, I never really had any trouble dealing with them. They're honestly rarely even in the way, and I oftentimes found myself ignoring them or dashing clean through them. I mean, maybe it'll get a hit on me here and there, but most of the Nightmaren, however interesting their designs, aren't all too much of a problem. It's sorta like all of the main stage Nightmaren are Goombas. You don't really think too much about them, and they're hardly ever a problem. As for the bosses, they're really easy. I mean, I suppose with a time limit of 120 seconds that effectively acts as your health meter, they kinda gotta be. It could be argued that the main challenge with these bosses is beating them fast rather than beating them period, though. You see, when you beat a boss, you get graded for your time in the form of a score multiplier. You can get up to double the points you got in the main stage. And from that angle, these bosses do become a challenge, but I don't know, when the badass Dark Mirror character, Riala, comes on stage with a sick opening and boss theme only to get easily paralooped 3 times, it does leave a little more to be desired, you know? Something I will give them though is how each boss has their own unique trick to dealing with them quickly. My favorite trick has to do with Claris's first boss, Gilwing. It's a little bit difficult, but you can fly over to the very end of its tail and paraloop it, killing it instantly. And seriously, I was watching speedruns of this game so I could find out if there were any other developer-intended tricks, and sure enough there were. I'll let you find those for yourself, but it's really cool to see how there's all these little tricks to do even with the bosses themselves. In the articles I read, the developers had said that they were focusing on replayability, and by God, have they done a spectacular job. And speaking of spectacular jobs, let's talk about the visuals and music. NiGHTS has certainly aged, but I think the game still manages to look great. There's some minor slip-ups here and there. Jekyll's cloak suddenly has its textures break when it's knocked off of them. There's some minor clipping and popping, and you can definitely tell that this game was originally made when 720p was considered HD. I can taste the pixels on some of these textures. But overall, the game has a surreal and whimsical vibe to it that still holds up. Of course, some of the animations on Claris and Elliot could have been better. Their running animations look stiff and feel all kinds of floaty, but I'm not going to sit here and hold NiGHTS and their dreams accountable for all that. This port is built off of the PlayStation 2 version, which was built directly off the Saturn's codebase from what I hear. It was made when 3D games were a little better understood, but still needed more time to get certain concepts down. And as for the music, the only way to put it is whimsical and full of energy. Not the degree of energy that Sonic has, mind you, although you'd be forgiven for thinking that some of these tracks were from Sonic CD, but they still feel lively and fun. The boss tracks are all unique from what I can tell, and they certainly know how to raise the roof. Just listen to the saxophone solo from Gilwing's theme. It's on the verge of rivaling that solo in Villanova from Sonic Rush. I find myself occasionally coming back to the soundtrack in particular to calm down a bit. The normal stage themes are really therapeutic. Look it up when you get the chance. I'm pretty sure there's multiple variants of the stage themes, depending on your relationship with the NiGHTopians. I could be entirely wrong. Right, that's something I didn't even really go over. All throughout the stages, there are these little fellas called NiGHTopians. When you enter a stage, you'll see them go about their daily lives, messing around, hatching out of eggs and all that. If that at all sounds familiar, then you're likely aware of the Chow from Sonic Adventure. Oh, fuck, the keys are jingling. Yeah, as it turns out, the A-Life system here was the precursor to the Chow Garden in Sonic Adventure. After going back through on my own time, I found the system to be sort of confusing and unclear. Turns out that seems to still be the general consensus about how these things work. to this day, people still haven't quite figured out the exact methods of reaching the ultimate goal of these things. All that's really known about the NiGHTOpians is that you can breed them if they're happy enough, you can paraloop them or drill dash into them, which will kill them and lower the mood of the stage overall, and you can ram some Nightmare remains into them, which will cause them to lay an egg that creates something called a Meepian, a NiGHTOpian with Nightmare parts. Making them happy enough by killing Nightmare and not making the pinheaded little shits into orphans while managing to get 2 Meepians with different body parts to breed will cause this red-cloaked NiGHTOpian called a Kingpian to appear. As the days progress, the little shit will start building a castle on your stage, marking your achievement for that mare. I'm not really entirely sure how it works myself, since I wasn't able to get one in one of my playthroughs. In reality, I'm just going off of what I read online with a Google search and this video here by a YouTube user, NiGHTopia Guardian 99. I usually try to get footage like this myself, but in this instance, I don't think I really had much of a choice given how difficult it is to actually get 2 Meepians with different parts to breed. That said, while this system is rather archaic, I can't help but take a little bit of interest in it. The game takes place in a dream world, so I feel like it's perfectly fitting for something like this to be so confusing and mysterious. Besides, it's not like it's required to beat the game or anything. This is post-game content, possibly some of the most unique post-game content I've seen in a game like this. Of course, I'm mostly here for that sweet high-speed score attack action, but I'll admit that this system interests me quite a bit. It's almost like you're trying to recall something that happened in a dream that didn't make a whole lot of sense. With that said, we're on to the final stage here. Now, normally I issue a spoiler warning and all that, and I still will here, but I would also like to mention that the game was delisted on most major digital storefronts, namely Steam, and that is such a shame. NiGHTS is a game I quickly fell in love with, and I genuinely believe that more people should at least give it a proper shot. Thanks to Sega, now it's harder for people to do that. I'll probably discuss more on this subject some other time. Anyways, I've rambled on long enough about Sega delisting NiGHTS into dreams here. Let's get back to talking about the game, shall we? The final stage is the same for both Claris and Elliot, the dream world equivalent of twin seeds. NiGHTS is just a few steps away, but as Claris or Elliot approach them, Wiseman intervenes, slinging them all the way over to a small floating island. The island hangs high in the void. Nothing but a couple of lights, a piece of the road, and some grass growing on the ground beneath them, only a couple steps away from the edge of the island at all times. They wander for a bit, knowing that they need to reach NiGHTS and stop Wiseman, but from this angle, there's nothing neither Claris nor Elliot can do. And with no other options, they jump into the seemingly endless darkness, far, far below them in a leap of faith. And, just as we think it was all in vain, I can't describe the feeling I had when getting here for the first time. I was so confused as to what to do. Eventually, I figured something would have happened if I were to jump off, and I feel like this is the moment that really made me love this game. That opening whistle, the upbeat music cheering you on, it's nothing short of a moment of triumph. You feel what the characters feel in that moment through the music. A moment of pure catharsis, finally experiencing the joy of flight without the aid of NiGHTS. The whole game, the children are relying on NiGHTS to save them by reclaiming their idia, and now Claris and Elliot are saving themselves alongside, as we'll see soon enough, NiGHTS. The stage itself is fairly straightforward. You're flying through a dream version of Twin Seeds, circling around buildings and clinging onto the balloons in the night sky. While flying as the children, they play a little differently from NiGHTS. For starters, paralooping is a no-go. Objects will be magnetized towards Claris or Elliot as they approach, making collecting the 20 chips required a little more difficult. Secondly, you won't be able to gain more time throughout the stage since you're collecting all 5 idia in one lap, so it's a mad dash to get the chips and reclaim your balls before you drop out of the sky. I will say, I do feel the camera being too close here more than ever. The stage is largely in the sky, so there isn't much in the way of terrain to guide you, leading me to get a little lost sometimes in the stage since it has a ton of verticality but very little to direct me. As Claris or Elliot reach NiGHTS, they find that they can't reach them alone due to the force field blocking their way. Try as they might, it just won't open up. But just then, the other kid shows up, allowing them to break down the barrier and duelize with NiGHTS to take on Wiseman. Unfortunately, I'd say that Wiseman is the easiest boss of them all. At the very least, I never really had any trouble with the guy. This time the goal is to get both versions of NiGHTS to Wiseman at the same time and drill dash into them. Do that a couple of times and you've beaten the game. And that was Nights into Dreams. While the game is certainly dated by today's standards, I really do love it. The message it wanted to deliver was clear as day, and I'm sure this game has probably helped some kid out there deal with the complicated emotions on display, be it through processing these feelings or being able to empathize with others who experience them. The gameplay was able to keep me heavily engaged, and I find it really impressive how it manages to still be fun whether you're just going for a carefree game or making a mad dash to racketing your new highest score. In other words, it strikes that perfect balance of being able to appeal to both casual and experienced players. And yeah, the visuals are a little dated, but I think they have a unique charm to them. Shit, in the re-releases, you can even play with graphics that closely mimic the Saturn version of the game. I really appreciated that feature. Plus, in the PlayStation 2 and HD re-releases of the game, you're even able to play Christmas Nights into Dreams, a jellified version of Claris's first level, complete with these cutscenes that look like they came straight out of a children's Christmas book. It's nothing too big, just an asset flip really, but it goes to show that this version of the game had just as much love poured into it as the original release. Unfortunately, thanks to Sega's aforementioned delisting of the game, now more than ever, Nights into Dreams is an incredibly difficult series to get into unless you're willing to pay out the ass for a Sega Saturn, an original copy of Nights into Dreams, and the analog controller that came with the game. That last one is optional as far as I know, but is important for the intended experience. Of course, there's also the PlayStation 2 version, but that version was exclusive to Japan to my knowledge. So on top of the roughly $80 you'll spend getting the game, you're probably also going to have to pay a large import fee. And my god, does that reek to say. While at a gameplay level it's just a simple score attack game about a jester flying through hoops really fast, you can feel the passion from the moment you boot up the first level. And yeah, you could emulate the game, but you shouldn't have to emulate a game to experience it, especially when there was already a native PC port. I understand that Sega is ultimately a business, and with rumors going around that Sega is aiming to make a subscription service for their games, I have no doubt in my mind that the games which were delisted are going to oh so coincidentally wind up on that service. Nevertheless, if you get the chance to play Nights into Dreams, do it. Seriously. The series has been out of action for nearly 17 years now, and with Sega making the announcement that they're reviving dead franchises last year, maybe Nights has a chance for a proper comeback instead of being relegated to a Wii game that hasn't been re-released since 2008 and a fucking slot machine. But unfortunately, I'm not putting my money on it.